general questions are preferred. When you get real specific, a lot of times I need a lot more details in order to give a specific opinion about something. But particularly if I'm unclear on anything, please, Q&As are fun for me. Okay, and everybody who registered should also be receiving a handout that we provided. It's in regards to probably the most common question we get regarding care costs and what's safe and not safe, and it involves the house and planning around the house and why it might not be a great idea to just like sign the house over to the kids, which is a question I get constantly is, hey, when's a good time for me to sign my house over to my kids so it doesn't go to nursing home costs? So that's what the handout is geared towards. But again, our topic is long-term care and kind of maintaining control. Like many things that we talk about, the first step that we really encourage people to take is make sure that you have your basic disability planning in place. I sound like a broken record talking about this. I mean, practically every time I'm teaching a CE to continuing education course to financial advisors or a class to other attorneys or one of these sessions that's more geared towards the general public, it seems like I spend a ton of the time talking about how important powers of attorney are. And the reason for that is because they are just unbelievably important. So a power of attorney for finances and healthcare is essentially saying, okay, if I don't have capacity to be making decisions for myself, these are the people I trust to step in and make those decisions on my behalf. And a power of attorney for finances can provide powers to that agent that allows for instance, trying to preserve assets in the event that you go to a nursing home or have long-term care costs. The rude awakening or the bad news that I have to give to people really consistently is if you do not have provisions that allow many different types of long-term care planning in your power of attorney, but then you lose capacity and are maybe faced with those care costs, the family does not have the powers to try and protect assets from those care costs. So the takeaway there is not every power of attorney says the same things or does the same things. You're only granting the authorities that are actually contained in that document. And not all these documents are the same. And so if when you created your power of attorney, if you have one, and by the way, if you're a legal adult, you darn well should have one. Every legal adult should, because otherwise you're stuck in guardianship court. But if you don't recall having a conversation with the attorney when you were drafting this stuff, or if you just got some online form, you probably do not have terms in there that are going to be usable if you face care costs. If you don't recall talking to the attorney about, hey, one of my primary concerns in retirement or disability is facing care costs, well, then how would they know to put those things in? And some attorneys are better than others with this stuff. Some of them just have sort of a boilerplate form that they put people's names on, and they aren't custom tailored to somebody's individual needs. Others just, they are trying to tailor it to your needs, but if that concern never comes up, well, then how do they know they need to be putting it in there? So take a look at your power of attorney. I mean, you're probably competent if you're sitting here watching this class. So that means you're still able to fix it if it's a problem. But take a look at your power of attorney and make sure that there's numerous terms in there that address long-term care expenses. Because if you're concerned with that expense and you don't have it dealt with in that power of attorney, your family's hands are pretty much tied because the only powers that they can gain in addition to that power of attorney is through the court system, and they have to petition for guardianship. And generally speaking, the court's not going to provide valuable powers to try and stretch out or protect any of your assets. So again, just impossible to overstate the need, for having a good power of attorney for finances. And healthcare is the same thing. I mean, you want to make sure that your family's not stuck in guardianship court if you become disabled. And the way you avoid that is by saying, well, this is the person I trust to make my healthcare decisions if I can't do it myself. And, oh, by the way, if that person's not available, well, then here's the backup to that person. It keeps you out of the court system, keeps the family or, whoever you trust in control of the situation so that they can do the best to help you. Because again, a lot of people don't like thinking about the possibility of a decline in health or, the need to pay for care, but, it's a reality that many of us face. And so not dealing with it ahead of time doesn't fix anything. All it does is creates worse results later. If you address it head on, family can get better results in the future. So then when you're actually facing care costs, there's two types of planning for care there. One is prospective planning, which is, well, what are the things we can do in advance to set ourselves up to make sure that we have the ideal level of protection in case we're facing long-term care expenses. And that can be numerous things. There's nothing without knowing somebody's individual circumstances that I can recommend to everybody, other than, of course, getting those powers of attorney together. This is where you're going to need to talk to an elder law attorney about, okay, this is what is best for my scenario. Because most of those recommendations tend to be based on, okay, how long might it be before I need care? And what am I trying to achieve? Am I trying to make sure my spouse is okay? Do I need to protect assets for my, disabled daughter who I've been supporting for her entire life, and without my assets, she's going to be in a difficult situation, or whatever. I want to make sure the family farm is not gobbled up by care costs because I'm the fourth generation of farmer, and I don't want to be the one to lose it. Whatever the priorities might be, and then in the context of, well, what do you own? What are your assets? Because different types of assets require different types of planning. So anytime you read something, take it with a bit of a grain of salt, because sometimes it's just marketing efforts for a particular kind of planning or anything. And the value of an elder law attorney should be that they're telling you what's best for you objectively, because what you're having them do is, how do I get the absolute best outcome? Not focused on one particular thing, buying an annuity or investing in a particular thing, or necessarily using a trust or whatever. They should take an objective approach to, okay, what are your assets? What are we trying to accomplish? Okay, here's how the stuff works. This is what I think is going to be best for you, and this is how we can achieve that. Emergency planning there's so much misinformation regarding emergency planning. And that's because people think that if I don't have 5 years prior to transitioning into care, then I don't have any options. As an example, I had a phone call last week with somebody who, it was with a couple of kids. Dad had passed away, mom's transitioning into a facility. And, one of the children thought that, mom's already, going to a facility. There's nothing we can do, right? They came into the whole meeting with this sort of, we figured it's worth talking to you, but we're not going to be able to do anything. So just tell us that we can't do anything. So then we know. And thankfully, the results were much, much better than that, because you don't necessarily need to have 5 years in order to be able to achieve some amount of savings, even if the person's already in the nursing home or in the assisted living facility. And that's the thing that I want to kind of, the biggest point of information that I want to have kind of spread like wildfire amongst our community is that you have options. They exist. You absolutely gain nothing by not inquiring about them. because this could be something that, makes sure that your spouse is able to maintain their lifestyle and frankly afford good care themselves later in their life if they ever need it. Or it can, protect a certain amount of money so that maybe you yourself, while you're in the facility, are capable of having a good quality of life because you haven't spent absolutely everything immediately on care where you have nothing left in order to be able to maintain a good lifestyle, or frankly, maybe even move facilities if that ever becomes necessary, because the type of care that you require is no longer the care that the place you're at provides. People's circumstances change. It's kind of an inevitability. So having some funds set aside that the family has access to, money talks. That's a thing I talk to my clients about. It's usually not in people's best situation to try to initially go into a facility on Medicaid. Medicaid's the primary program that most people use as a assistance in paying for care. The issue with focusing solely on, okay, how do I get eligible for Medicaid before I go into a facility is you lack choice. If you ever hear horror stories about, I wanted to go to this place, but the only place I could get into was 20 miles away and it wasn't a great facility, that might be somebody who didn't have anything that they could spend on getting into a good facility so that they could get their care there. A lot of places have some kind of financial requirement to get your foot in the door, but then you can transition onto Medicaid. It's a lot more difficult to get good placement starting on Medicaid. You want to go to the place that you ultimately want to stay at, maybe pay for a little bit, make sure that you have some amount of assets preserved to maintain your quality of life and that your spouse is going to be okay, and then transition on to Medicaid. So there's many things that can be done in an emergency. Another big bit of advice with that is seek advice when you're facing care costs. Do not just take somebody's word for it, either at the facility or some social worker or something else about, just spend down to this level and then put in an application for assistance in paying for care, as though that's the only thing you can do. Number one, I can't tell you how many times that the advice they gave about what they need to spend down to is just plain wrong. Where the family needlessly spent way too much money before they were able to get assistance in paying for care. Because it isn't just a set amount of dollars that somebody can have. There's also exempt assets and non-exempt assets. And exempt assets don't even count towards this level that you have to spend down to. So most of the time, in my experience, the family or whoever's dealing with the financial matters never got a walkthrough on their individual assets and whether they were countable or not, and whether or not anything can be done for some of the countable assets other than just spending it down. Most people are just told, spend down to $50,000 or something like that, and then apply for Medicaid, and you'll be able to stay there. And again, sometimes that advice is just plain wrong. And when we're talking about the dollar figures here, which is somebody's entire life savings, it's no matter how much they have, whether it's $50,000 or $500,000, it's everything that family has. So this isn't where cutting corners or not seeking advice is ever in anybody's best interest. You want to walk through each asset. Okay, how does this thing function? Does it count? What can I do with it? Because that's how you get the best results with this stuff. Do not just listen to, spend down to $50,000, put in an application. Because you are, in most instances, get much worse results by doing that, where a lot of things maybe could have been held on to, maybe even not by doing much in the way of planning. Maybe it's just because whoever is telling you to do that does not understand the composition of your assets and whether or not they're countable. So this kind of planning is complex, and it's something that, in my opinion, you really need to seek some advice out at the time. But again, the takeaway here is, even if somebody's facing long-term care expenses, there are things that can be done. So, sorry, I've got a question here. Okay. So, with a power of attorney, one of the questions was just more specifically about when there is a power of attorney and there's terms that allow planning, what does the power of attorney actually do? And so the answer to that is pretty situation specific. Like everything, I'm not trying to dodge the answer here. It's incredibly situation specific. But power of attorney is the one who's in charge of the assets at that time. They have the power to invest and spend and move things and, whatever they might need to be doing, especially if they have those long-term care provisions in there. And so they might be transferring assets. They could be setting up a trust. There are numerous types of trusts that could be useful. There is a thing called a first-party pooled special needs trust that some participants will put some funds in. They're not countable assets then for long-term care expenses, so that they have some funds set aside so that they can be used throughout that person's life, in addition to the assistance program that they can get access to and help pay for care. So that's just one example. But they might be either transferring or selling real estate. I mean, sometimes when people move into a long-term care facility, it's appropriate for them to sell their house because nobody's living there anymore. And so then they're dealing with the proceeds. But everybody's situation, again, is a little bit different. So there's no magic bullets in this kind of planning, unfortunately. It's one of those things that really what the power of attorney should be doing, one of the first steps is just if there's an existing relationship with an elder law attorney that, the attorney that maybe did the planning for mom and dad, if they did any long-term care planning, you certainly should be calling that person. If you don't have an existing relationship, you should seek out an elder law attorney and have a conversation with them. Again, the dollar figures that we're talking about in relationship to the estate are large. This is potentially a large percentage of their estate that's subject to being exhausted pretty rapidly. And so you want to make sure what are the rules, what's exempt and non-exempt, and what programs are available and when you might actually want to be accessing them. One thing that I haven't mentioned at all, but is very important for everybody to know, is there's this pension benefit through the Department of Veterans Affairs for wartime veterans. And the group that never thinks to apply for this is the spouses of wartime veterans. And so this program, it's called the Improved Pension Program. A lot of people refer to it somewhat incorrectly as aid and attendance. But it's this pension that will pay a monthly benefit right to the person who needs the care. So it's money coming into them, not going to the facility. But then the person can spend it on things like the facility expense. And so it's just this tax-free pension. But it has to be either a wartime veteran or the surviving spouse of a wartime veteran. And surviving spouse basically means that they had to have been married at the time that the veteran died and they haven't remarried. But as long as they have recurring unreimbursed medical expenses, and there's pretty much a bright line for income, or assets, which is right around $129,000, and the house is not an accountable asset, then a person could potentially get some money coming in that helps offset their long-term care cost. And so, you know, for a married veteran who needs care, this is like $27,000 of tax-free income. And so if you're paying, say, $60,000 because your long-term care expense is $5,000 a month, this VA benefit can cut out almost half of that, which means your money can last twice as long if you are qualified for this VA pension. So, you know, that's a wonderful program. All the attorneys at my office were accredited by the Department of Veterans Affairs. Anybody you're seeking advice from is supposed to be accredited by the Department of Veterans Affairs. And I've taught a lot of courses. I'm probably the one at my office that does the most of that kind of planning. I've taught a lot of courses to other Wisconsin attorneys and a few national classes. So I really like the program. Now the VA has this 3-year look back period. Basically meaning that if you transfer assets or do anything to get financially qualified within 3 years prior to an application for assistance and paying for care, they're gonna say, well, what have you done? Did you transfer? You know, were any of these assets transferred without receiving fair market value back? And if so, well, then we're going to delay providing you assistance based on the amount that you transferred. So large amounts, they will delay your qualification longer. Smaller amounts, it'll be a shorter period of time. Somewhat similar to Medicaid, which instead of a 3-year look back period like the VA, Medicaid has a 5-year look back, where again, they say on an application, well, what have you done in the last 5 years? And hopefully the answer is, well, nothing. I haven't done anything in the last 5 years. I did it all 5.5 years ago, or 6 years ago, or 10 years ago. Where it doesn't fall in the look back period. But again, even if you do not have 5 years or 10 years or however long, even if you don't have 5 or 10 minutes, you're already in a nursing home. Again, that does not mean that there are no options available to you. There's ways to allocate money around depending on what you own to make sure that some amount of funds is set aside for the spouse or that the family has access to, make sure you have a good quality of life, and that it doesn't get recouped all by the state after you die, where they become the first beneficiary necessarily. So again, it's important when you're dealing with all of somebody's assets that you don't take that kind of stuff lightly. You know, you seek some advice. I got a couple of questions on the VA benefit here. So one of the questions was, do the veteran have to be in the war or just serving during wartime? And the answer is just serving during wartime. So specifically what they need is they have to have had 90 days of active duty service, and only one of those days has to land in a wartime period. They have to be 90, consecutive days. So as an example, somebody could start their service on December 31st of 1946, which is still considered a wartime period for World War II, even though it's not what you're really going to read in a history book. They could start their service December 31st of 1946 and then have 89 days into 1947 and have that be their entire service. And it could have been in, Georgia. They don't have to be deployed out of country or anything. It just has to be active duty for other than training purposes. And then that will qualify. And the other question there was, how do I find info on the veteran planning? Our website's actually a really good resource for that. There's a whole group of sections on there that kind of walk through some of the planning around this VA benefit, especially in the context of long-term care. There is a lot of screwball misinformation about the VA on the web that, like the actual Department of Veterans Affairs website is needlessly confusing, in my opinion, in part because they always list it as, maximum income. And the maximum income that they list is just whatever the largest benefit is going to be that you could potentially achieve. But then they don't explain that, well, if you're over that income, you can use all these medical expenses as deductions so that you're considered under that maximum income amount. So a lot of people will look at it and say, oh, okay, it's $27,000. And boy, me and my spouse, between our Social Security, we make $36,000 together. So boy, we don't qualify for that program then. So I'm not even going to pursue it. But that's not how it works. They look at your income for VA purposes, which is your gross income, subtracting all the unreimbursed medical expenses to figure out what they consider your income to be. So it's just an example of, there's not a lot of good explanations about how this stuff works out on the internet, at least that I've found. But I do trust the info on our website, frankly, because I wrote it, and that is correct. And it's also written in okay, how is this used in the context of people's care, which is important, because that's the most common thing. A lot of the things that I've read do not talk about, okay, how is this specifically used for care costs? Before I answer the next question, I should also point out that we've got a survey that we will be sending out to everybody. So there's a link to an online evaluation form that, I really want to get people's feedback when we teach these. I want to know if we're kind of meeting expectations, because we tweak these classes, and it's hard to get a feel for how well I'm connecting for everybody's needs, because I'm just talking to a screen here, which is not ideal on my end. And then, so if you would please fill out the evaluation form. If you need to follow up about your own specific situation and would like to talk to one of the attorneys at my office, there's a spot on there where you can request an initial consultation to indicate, yeah, we'd like to set up and actually talk to an attorney about our situation. And how we do those, they're 2-hour consultations. We don't charge for those, because I have no idea what we would be advising anybody to do or what kind of planning they're going to need until we're able to have a conversation. And I'm a big advocate of making sure that there's not too many barriers to kind of educating the public on what they ought to be doing. Okay, so back to another question. So I've got SSDI. Will I be able to transfer to Medicare in July 2021? Will those monies from SSDI continue if and when I enter assisted living? Yeah, so if you're on SSDI, 2 years after, well, with a couple of exceptions that give you earlier enrollment, but 2 years after enrollment with SSDI, you should be qualified for Medicare. That's correct. The monies from SSDI, if you enter assisted living, yeah, I mean, SSDI is like taking early Social Security. They don't end if you're getting care or anything like that. Now, if you need to transition onto Medicaid and you're receiving SSDI payments or income from any other source, that can be considered part of what you need to spend on your care. But that's more of a Medicaid thing than it is a Medicare thing. Okay. I'm just checking to see if I've got any other questions, because I've pretty much run out of time. Well, not seeing any more. So hopefully you guys found this to be a useful way to spend a half an hour with me. These are weekly courses that we teach, Wednesdays at noon. So if you found this useful, these are almost always rotating topics where we talk about new things most weeks. We really encourage participation, and hopefully you found this to be a useful way to spend your time, and you'll join us again. Next week is going to be called Scary Stories, Tales from the Unplanned. So hopefully that'll be kind of a fun one, a little Halloween theme on the scariness, but just things that go awry with either bad or no planning, which every single attorney at my office, because this is the only area of law that we practice. So we've all got, so many stories about, unfortunate circumstances But yeah, thankfully, we have many more stories about plans that were put in place and worked well. But those aren't scary, so they're not going to be next week's topic. So again, if anybody needs to follow up with the attorneys at our office, please, you can just indicate on your evaluation form that you want to talk about your individual circumstances, and we'd connect and have a meeting. So again, thanks for your time. Wish everybody well, stay safe, and hope to see you